Billionaire CEO was stunned to see his estranged ex-wife in first-class flight, with twins he never knew existed. I accused you of being after my money. Every single day of our marriage, I looked for signs that you were using me, just waiting to take what you could. James confessed, his voice raw with regret. But you never asked for anything, did you? Not in the divorce, not after. You just disappeared. Olivia's eyes held his across the narrow airplane aisle. The sleeping twins nestled against her shoulders. Would you have believed me if I'd stayed? If I'd told you I was pregnant? No, he admitted, the truth painful but necessary. Rebecca destroyed my ability to trust. After she emptied my accounts and vanished, I swore I'd never be that vulnerable again. I built walls so high that I couldn't see what was real anymore. Couldn't see you. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here was Olivia in first class with children he never knew existed, children who were undeniably his. The woman he'd accused of being a gold digger had raised his children for 4 years without a penny of his billions. Have you ever been so wounded by your past that you poisoned your future? Have you let old betrayals blind you to new possibilities? This is the story of a man whose fear of being used for his wealth cost him the family he never knew he wanted, and the extraordinary second chance that fate delivered at 35,000 feet. If you've ever struggled to trust after being betrayed or found yourself sabotaging relationships because of past wounds, hit that like button. Sometimes our greatest enemy isn't the person who hurt us before, but the walls we build to make sure it never happens again. Hi, my beautiful sisters. I want to take a moment to remind you of something powerful today. No matter how much life has challenged you, no matter how many times you've been hurt or misunderstood, your worth is not defined by your past or anyone else's perception of you. Just like in this story, we all face moments where our trust is tested, where we're made to question our own strength. But you are not broken, you are growing. Your resilience, your ability to rise up again, is what makes you unstoppable. Sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives come from the hardest pages. You deserve to rebuild, to reclaim your happiness, and to open yourself to love and healing, even when the road ahead feels uncertain. Never underestimate your power to create a new beginning, because it's never too late for a fresh start, and no mistake is too great to overcome. Remember, you are worthy of the love you seek, the success you strive for, and the peace you deserve. Keep moving forward, no matter the obstacles, and trust that your best days are still ahead. I'm Mr. Harrison, and today I'm sharing the remarkable journey of a billionaire who discovered that protecting his money had cost him everything that truly mattered. At 33, James Daniels had built Blue Peak Technologies from a startup in his garage to a multi-billion-dollar empire. His name graced the covers of business magazines. His innovations transformed industries, and his wealth afforded him anything money could buy. To the outside world, he was the definition of success, a self-made man with the Midas touch. But behind the carefully crafted public image lay a man haunted by ghosts of betrayal. 5 years before his rise to prominence, James had fallen hard for a woman named Rebecca. She was beautiful, charming, and seemed to love him for who he was, not the promising entrepreneur he was becoming. For 8 months, James believed he had found his perfect match, until the day he discovered his accounts drained and Rebecca gone without a trace. I trusted her with everything, James confided to his CFO Marcus during a late-night strategy session. My heart, my home, my passwords. What kind of fool does that make me? Marcus, who had been with James since the early days, shook his head. It makes you human, James. We all want to believe in love. Well, I learned my lesson, James replied, his expression hardening into the mask that would become his trademark in boardrooms across the country. Trust is a luxury I can't afford. Not in business and certainly not in my personal life. As Blue Peak Technologies grew, so did James's reputation for brilliant innovation and ruthless self-protection. He dated occasionally beautiful, accomplished women who understood the rules. No access to his personal life, no keys to his home, no expectations of a future. The arrangements suited him perfectly, or so he told himself during the quiet hours when his penthouse felt more like a fortress than a home. Then came the charity gala that changed everything. James had attended out of obligation, Another evening of polite smiles and strategic networking. He hadn't expected to meet someone like Olivia Carter, a dedicated social worker with a passion for helping foster children transition to permanent homes. "These children don't need your tax-deductible donations, Mr. Daniels," she'd said during their first conversation, her hazel eyes direct and unflinching. "They need consistent presence, time, attention, things money can't buy." "Are you suggesting my contribution is worthless?" he'd asked, more intrigued than offended. "I'm suggesting it's incomplete." Her smile had softened the critique. "But then, most of us are incomplete in one way or another, aren't we?" Unlike the women who typically orbited his social circle, Olivia hadn't seemed impressed by his wealth or status. She challenged his perspectives, questioned his priorities, and somehow, in the process, claimed his heart. Their courtship had been a revelation for James, evenings spent in simple pleasures rather than extravagant displays. Conversations that stretched until dawn, a connection that seemed to transcend his usual defenses. For the first time since Rebecca, James found himself wanting to lower his walls, to let someone see the man behind the billionaire facade. "You're different with her," Marcus observed after meeting Olivia at a company function. "More human." James had laughed off the comment, but privately he recognized the truth in it. Olivia brought out a version of himself he'd thought long buried, someone capable of vulnerability, of genuine connection. What James hadn't known then was that Olivia had been drowning in medical debt. Her mother's cancer treatment had depleted her savings and maxed out her credit cards. When he discovered her situation 6 months into their relationship, James had immediately offered assistance, waving away her protests with assurances that his help came with no strings attached. "I don't want your charity, James," Olivia had insisted, pride evident in the set of her shoulders despite the exhaustion shadowing her eyes. "It's not charity when it's someone you love," he'd replied, the words slipping out before he could censor them. It was the first time he'd spoken of love, and the vulnerability of the moment had terrified him almost as much as it had thrilled him. Olivia had stared at him, tears welling in her eyes. "Do you mean that?" "I do," he'd said, surprising himself with the certainty he felt. "I love you, Olivia. Let me help you. Not because I pity you or want to control you, but because I can't bear to see you struggle when I have the means to make things easier." In that moment, with Olivia's arms wrapped tightly around him and her tears dampening his shirt, James had believed he'd finally conquered the demons of his past, that his heart, so carefully guarded for so long, had found its safe harbor. They married in a small, intimate ceremony a year after meeting, a rushed affair that raised eyebrows among James's business associates, but felt perfectly right to the couple caught in the whirlwind of new love. For the first few months, their life together seemed charmed. James continued building his empire while Olivia pursued her passion for helping foster children, their different worlds somehow complementing rather than conflicting with each other. But as the honeymoon phase faded, the ghost of Rebecca began to hover at the edges of James's consciousness, whispering doubts that grew louder with each passing day. Every time Olivia expressed gratitude for his generosity, he heard an ulterior motive. When she suggested more modest date nights, he interpreted it as manipulation, a ploy to appear uninterested in his money while benefiting from it nonetheless. "Why don't you want to attend the Andersons' gala?" he demanded one evening, watching as Olivia curled up on their sofa with a book instead of preparing for the high-profile event. "Because it's our only night together this week, and I'd rather spend it with just you," she replied, patting the space beside her invitingly. But James couldn't accept the simple explanation. In his mind, the pieces arranged themselves into a different pattern. She was avoiding public scrutiny, keeping their relationship private to hide something. The more she tried to prove her love was genuine, the more convinced he became that she was playing him for a fool. "Is this about the money?" he pressed, unable to let it go. "Are you worried people will think you married me for my wealth?" Olivia's expression had shifted then, hurt blooming in her eyes. "Is that what you think? After all this time together, you still believe I'm with you for your money?" "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." She set her book aside, her voice quiet but firm. "James, I need you to hear me. I love you. Not your bank account, not your company, not your status. You. But I'm starting to wonder if you'll ever truly believe that. The argument had ended in a stalemate, as so many of their disagreements did. But it marked the beginning of a pattern that would ultimately destroy their marriage. James's suspicions grew like shadows at sunset, stretching and distorting every interaction until he could no longer see Olivia clearly through the darkness of his own making. 6 months into their marriage, the arguments had escalated from occasional disagreements to near-constant tension. James scrutinized bank statements, questioned Olivia's friendships, and grew increasingly convinced that her continued work with foster children, often in underprivileged neighborhoods, was a cover for something more sinister. "You were 3 hours late," he accused one night when she returned from an emergency placement for a child whose mother had been hospitalized. "I texted you," Olivia replied, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "This little boy had nowhere else to go, James. What was I supposed to do?" "You're supposed to be my wife first," he snapped, the words sharp with unspoken accusations. "Or is that just a convenient title for you?" Olivia had stared at him, something breaking behind her eyes. "Do you even hear yourself? Do you have any idea how cruel you sound right now?" "I'm being realistic," James insisted, the fear driving his suspicion now fully in control of his words. "People use other people. That's how the world works." "That may be your world," Olivia had whispered, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "But it's not mine, and I don't think I can live in it anymore." If you've ever found yourself sabotaging something beautiful because of past wounds, hit that like button. Sometimes the very walls we build to protect ourselves become the prisons that keep us from the love we deserve. The next morning, Olivia was gone. No dramatic confrontation, no final ultimatum, just an empty closet, a wedding ring on the nightstand, and a note that said simply, "When you decide you want to trust someone more than you want to protect yourself, you'll be ready for love. I hope you find it someday." James had convinced himself he was better off without her, that he had narrowly escaped another Rebecca situation, that his suspicions had been justified all along. When Olivia didn't return to claim any of their shared assets or request financial support in the divorce, he interpreted it not as proof of her integrity but as a clever long game. Surely she would resurface when her situation grew desperate enough. She never did. Instead, she had disappeared from his life completely, leaving no forwarding address, changing her phone number, severing all connections to their shared past. James had buried himself in work, channeling his pain into ambition, building Blue Peak Technologies into the behemoth it was today. "You need to slow down," Marcus warned him 6 months after the divorce was finalized. "You're working yourself into the ground." "Work is the only thing that makes sense," James replied, not looking up from the prototype he was adjusting. "Everything else is just noise." For 5 years, he had lived in the fortress of his own making, surrounded by wealth and achievement but fundamentally alone. Occasionally, in the quiet hours before dawn when even billionaires face their demons, he would wonder if he had been wrong about Olivia. If perhaps, in his determination to protect himself from betrayal, he had destroyed the one genuine connection he had ever known. But those moments of clarity were quickly buried beneath the demands of empire building, until fate orchestrated an impossible reunion at 35,000 feet. The moment James Daniels stepped onto the first-class cabin of Flight 1842 to New York, his world tilted on its axis. There, nestled comfortably in Seat 3A, was Olivia Carter, the woman who had once been his wife, the woman whose absence had left a void no amount of success could fill. But it wasn't her presence alone that knocked the breath from his lungs. It was the 2 small children seated beside her, their faces buried in matching picture books, oblivious to how their very existence had just shattered a man's carefully constructed reality. "Sir, would you like to be seated?" The flight attendant's voice barely registered as James stared at the tableau before him. The children, a boy and girl with matching chestnut curls, couldn't be more than 4 years old. For years, the math wasn't difficult. Olivia looked up then, her hazel eyes widening in recognition. The color drained from her face, her lips parting in silent shock. For 5 heartbeats, they remained locked in a wordless exchange, the cabin around them fading to insignificance. "Mommy, can I have my juice now?" The little girl's voice broke the spell, her small hand tugging at Olivia's sleeve. James found his seat, 7D, mercifully several rows behind them, and sank into it, his mind racing. Olivia had children, twins by the look of them, and unless he was mistaken about the timing, they had been conceived during the final tumultuous months of their marriage. Which meant they were his. The realization hit him with physical force, a blow to the solar plexus that left him gasping. He had children he'd never known existed. Children who had been living, growing, learning to walk and talk and read, all without him knowing they drew breath in this world. How had it come to this? The question echoed in his mind as the plane taxied down the runway, carrying him toward a confrontation 5 years in the making. James barely registered the takeoff, his thoughts a chaotic storm of questions and emotions. Why hadn't she told him? How could she keep something so monumental from him? What kind of life had she built for them? And most pressingly, what was she doing in first class? The Olivia he had known had been careful with money, practical to a fault. Even when he'd offered to upgrade her lifestyle, she'd resisted, preferring simple comforts to luxury. Yet here she was, in the most expensive seats on the plane, with 2 well-dressed children and what appeared to be a designer handbag tucked beside her seat. Had she remarried? Found someone wealthy who could provide the life James had once offered? The thought sent an unexpected surge of jealousy through him, followed immediately by shame. He had no right to jealousy, not after the way he'd treated her. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and James knew he couldn't wait any longer. Rising from his seat with the deliberate calm that had become his trademark in boardrooms across the globe, he made his way forward, each step carrying him closer to a truth he both craved and feared. Olivia saw him coming, her posture stiffening as she whispered something to the children. The boy, Jackson, he would later learn, glanced up curiously while the girl, Emma, continued coloring, her small brow furrowed in concentration. Olivia. Her name felt foreign on his tongue after so many years of forced silence. James. Her voice was steady, but her knuckles whitened around the armrest. "I didn't expect to see you here." Clearly, the word came out harsher than he intended. He softened his tone. "Are they yours?" A flash of something, defiance, perhaps, or protective instinct, crossed her features. "Yes, they're my children, Emma and Jackson." James's gaze shifted to the twins, searching their faces for confirmation of what he already suspected. Emma had his mother's eyes, deep blue and intelligent. Jackson's jawline mirrored his own, the same determined set that had stared back at him from childhood photographs. "They're mine too, aren't they?" The question emerged as barely more than a whisper, yet it seemed to fill the space between them with its weight. Olivia hesitated, then nodded once, a short, sharp movement. Yes. The simple admission shattered something inside him. Not his heart, which had been broken long ago, but the protective shell he'd built around it, the fortress of indifference and ambition that had allowed him to function these past 5 years. "Why didn't you tell me?" The words scraped his throat raw with emotion. "Would you have believed me?" Olivia countered, her voice low to avoid the children's attention. "Or would you have accused me of trying to trap you? Of using pregnancy to secure your money?" The accusation stung precisely because it contained a kernel of truth. The James of 5 years ago, wounded and distrustful, might well have reacted exactly as she described. "You had no right to keep them from me." Even as he said it, James recognized the hollowness of his indignation. He had forfeited his rights when he had chosen suspicion over trust, when he had allowed his past to poison his future. "I had every right to protect them," Olivia replied, her voice gaining strength. "I never wanted them to feel the way you made me feel. Like their love wasn't enough. Like they were constantly being evaluated for ulterior motives." James flinched, the truth of her words landing like physical blows. "I was wrong," he admitted, the confession wrenched from some deep, previously untapped well of honesty. "About you. About everything." Surprise flickered across Olivia's face, quickly masked by caution. "It's too late for that, James." "Is it?" He glanced at the children, his children, who were now watching their exchange with undisguised curiosity. They deserve to know their father, and I deserve a chance to know them. Mommy, who is this man? Emma asked, her crayon forgotten as she studied James with unnerving intensity. Olivia hesitated, clearly unprepared for this moment. This is an old friend of Mommy's, she finally said. My name is James, he offered, crouching to the little girl's eye level. I knew your mom a long time ago. If you've ever faced a moment of truth that could change the course of your life, hit that subscribe button. What happens next in this story might just remind you that sometimes the most important journeys begin with a single act of courage. Do you like dinosaurs? Jackson interjected, holding up a plastic Tyrannosaurus Rex. This one's my favorite because he's the king. I do like dinosaurs, James replied, his throat tight with emotion. When I was your age, I had a whole collection of them. Really? Jackson's eyes widened with newfound interest. Mom, can he sit with us? I want to show him my other dinosaurs. Olivia's expression softened slightly at her son's enthusiasm. That's up to Mr. Daniels. I'm sure he's very busy. I'm not, James said quickly. Not too busy for this. Their eyes met over the children's heads, and for a moment, James glimpsed the woman he had fallen in love with, compassionate, strong, willing to see the best in him despite everything. The woman he had foolishly pushed away. 1 hour, Olivia conceded. You can join us for 1 hour. As James settled into the empty seat across the aisle, accepting a slightly battered stegosaurus from Jackson's outstretched hand, he understood with perfect clarity that his life had irrevocably changed. The empire he had built, the wealth he had accumulated, the power he wielded, none of it compared to the value of this moment, this connection to the family he hadn't known he had. This one's a plant eater, Jackson explained seriously, handing James another dinosaur. He has a really long neck to reach the tall trees. That's a brachiosaurus, James said, carefully examining the toy. Did you know they were some of the largest animals ever to walk on land? Jackson's eyes grew round. Bigger than elephants? Much bigger. Some were as tall as a 4-story building. Wow! The boy breathed, clearly impressed. Do you know about all dinosaurs? Not all of them, James admitted with a smile. But I've always found them fascinating. While Jackson continued his dinosaur education, Emma watched James with a thoughtful expression that seemed far too mature for her 4 years. Finally, she slid from her seat and stood directly in front of him, her blue eyes, his mother's eyes, studying him with unnerving intensity. You look like the man in Mommy's picture, she announced. James glanced at Olivia, who was suddenly very interested in the in-flight magazine. What picture is that? He asked gently. The one she keeps in her special box. She looks at it sometimes when she thinks we're sleeping. Emma tilted her head. Are you that man? Before James could respond, Olivia intervened. Emma, sweetheart, why don't you show James your drawing? You were working so hard on it earlier. The little girl considered the suggestion, then nodded, returning to her seat to retrieve her coloring book. I made a princess with a castle, she explained, presenting the page with solemn pride. She lives there all by herself because she's very brave. It's beautiful, James said, taking in the carefully colored figure standing alone before an elaborate purple castle. But doesn't she get lonely sometimes? Emma shrugged. Maybe. But Mommy says sometimes being alone is better than being with people who make you sad. The innocent comment landed like a physical blow. James looked up to find Olivia watching him, her expression a complex mixture of apology and defiance. Kids repeat everything they hear, she said quietly. Even the things we wish they wouldn't. I deserved that, James acknowledged, handing the coloring book back to Emma with a gentle smile. Your princess is very talented. I bet she could do amazing things with her castle. For the next 45 minutes, James immersed himself in the world of his children, listening to Jackson's dinosaur facts, admiring Emma's artwork, and answering their endless questions about everything from his favorite color to whether he believed in aliens. With each passing moment, the weight of what he had missed first steps, first words, first days of preschool, pressed more heavily upon him. Eventually, both children began to yawn, the excitement of the day catching up with them. Olivia produced small travel pillows and blankets from her carry-on, expertly settling them for a nap. Within minutes, they were asleep, Emma curled against her mother's side. Jackson sprawled across his seat with his dinosaurs clutched protectively to his chest. "They're incredible," James said softly, his gaze lingering on their peaceful faces. "You've done an amazing job with them." "Thank you," Olivia replied, her voice equally quiet. "They're the best thing that's ever happened to me." "How have you managed?" The question had been burning in his mind since he first spotted her in first class. "Financially, I mean, your work with foster children was important but not exactly lucrative." A small, enigmatic smile curved Olivia's lips. "I wrote a book. A book about the foster care system, about the children who fall through the cracks and the changes needed to truly serve them." She shrugged slightly, careful not to disturb Emma. "It resonated with people, became a bestseller, led to a speaking career, consulting work with state agencies, eventually my own foundation." James stared at her, trying to reconcile this accomplished woman with the social worker he'd married. "That's incredible. Life goes on, James. For all of us." Her gaze was steady, unflinching. "I built something meaningful from the ashes of our marriage. Something that helps children who need advocates. Something that allows me to provide for Emma and Jackson without depending on anyone else." The implication was clear. She hadn't needed his money after all. Had never needed it. The irony of his suspicions, that she had married him for financial security, contrasted sharply with the reality before him. Olivia had walked away from his wealth and built her own success on her own terms. "There in a private school in Manhattan," she continued, stroking Emma's hair absently. "I've been invited to speak at a conference there. We're making a vacation of it. Museums, Central Park, their first Broadway show." "They live in California?" James asked, suddenly realizing he didn't even know where his children had spent their lives. "San Francisco. I have a house in Pacific Heights." She met his gaze directly. "A good life, James. We have a good life." Without him, the unspoken words hung between them, a painful truth he had no right to challenge. "I want to be part of their lives," he said finally, the words emerging with a certainty that surprised even him. "I know I have no right to ask, but I'm asking anyway. Please, Olivia, let me know my children." Olivia was quiet for a long moment, her gaze shifting between the sleeping twins and the man who had once been her husband. "It's not that simple," she said finally. "You can't just walk into their lives and then walk out again if it gets difficult or inconvenient. They're not a business deal you can abandon if the terms don't suit you." "I know that. Do you?" Her voice was gentle but firm. "Because the James the first knew couldn't commit to trusting his wife. How can that man commit to being a father?" The question cut deep precisely because it was fair. James had proven himself incapable of the most fundamental aspect of relationship, trust. What right did he have to ask for a place in these children's lives when he had so thoroughly failed the woman who had given birth to them? "I'm not that man anymore," he said quietly. "Or at least I don't want to be." "Wanting isn't enough, James. These are children. My children. I won't let them be hurt by your inability to believe in something you can't control or quantify." James nodded, accepting the justice of her words even as they pierced him. "What if I could prove to you that I've changed? That I can be the father they deserve?" Olivia studied him, searching for something in his expression. "How would you do that?" Before he could answer, the captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their initial descent into New York. The twins stirred, Jackson rubbing his eyes sleepily, while Emma immediately reached for her coloring book. "We'll talk more after we land," Olivia said, helping the children sit up and straighten their seats. "This isn't a conversation we should have in front of them." James returned to his own seat for landing, his mind racing with possibilities and fears. He had one chance to convince Olivia that he deserved a place in their children's lives. One opportunity to prove that the man who had driven her away with his suspicion and distrust was not the man he was today, or at least not the man he could become with their help. As the plane touched down on the runway, James Daniels, billionaire CEO, technological innovator, and newly discovered father, found himself facing the most important negotiation of his life. Not for market share or intellectual property, but for the chance to be part of his children's future. For the opportunity to prove to Olivia, to Emma and Jackson, and perhaps most importantly to himself, that he could be more than his mistakes. If you've ever been given a second chance you weren't sure you deserved, hit that like button. The most profound journeys often begin when we're forced to confront the consequences of our past choices. And what happens next might just remind you that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. The arrivals terminal at JFK Airport hummed with the controlled chaos of thousands of travelers rushing to their destinations. James stood slightly apart from the flow, watching as Olivia efficiently gathered the twins' belongings and prepared to leave the secure area. "Where are you staying?" he asked when she approached, Jackson's small hand in hers, Emma trailing slightly behind with her pink backpack. "The Peninsula," Olivia replied. "We have a car waiting. May I join you? Just for a coffee in the hotel restaurant," he added quickly when he saw her hesitation. To continue our conversation, Olivia glanced down at the twins, who were beginning to show signs of travel fatigue. "Not today, James. They're tired, and this has been a lot to process. For all of us." The disappointment must have shown on his face because her expression softened slightly. "Tomorrow. Meet us at the hotel restaurant at 9. The children have a late breakfast before we head to the Museum of Natural History." "The Dinosaur Museum?" Jackson perked up immediately. "Are we still going?" "Absolutely," Olivia assured him. "Nothing has changed about our plans." Except everything had changed, James thought as he watched them walk away, Emma turning once to wave shyly at him before they disappeared into the crowd. Everything had changed the moment he stepped onto that plane. Back in his Manhattan penthouse, James paced restlessly, unable to settle despite the exhaustion of travel and emotional upheaval. The space that had once seemed the perfect expression of his success now felt hollow, sterile, a showcase rather than a home. There were no finger paintings on the refrigerator, no small shoes by the door, no evidence that the life lived within these walls included anything more meaningful than business success and material acquisition. "What do I do, Marcus?" he asked when his CFO answered his late-night call. "How do I convince her to let me be part of their lives?" "You're asking me for parenting advice?" Marcus sounded both amused and concerned. "The same guy who once told me children were tiny terrorists dedicated to destroying productivity? I was wrong about a lot of things," James admitted. "Help me not be wrong about this." There was a long pause before Marcus spoke again. "You can't approach this like a business problem, James. You can't strategize your way into their lives or negotiate terms that guarantee success. This is about human connection, the very thing you've spent years avoiding. So what do I do? You show up. You listen. You put their needs before your own. And most importantly, you accept that you can't control the outcome." Marcus's voice softened. "This isn't about what you deserve, James. It's about what those children deserve. A father who sees them for who they are, not reflections of his own fears." The words echoed in James's mind as he stood outside the Peninsula's restaurant the next morning, 15 minutes early, his heart racing with an anxiety no business meeting had ever provoked. He had faced hostile takeovers and market crashes with less trepidation than he felt at the prospect of breakfast with his ex-wife and the children he barely knew. They arrived precisely at 9, the twins freshly scrubbed and vibrating with excitement about their museum plans. Emma wore a dress patterned with butterflies, her dark curls tamed into neat pigtails. Jackson sported a t-shirt featuring a detailed dinosaur skeleton, his expression brightening when he spotted James. "You came!" he exclaimed, as if James's presence was an unexpected gift rather than a scheduled meeting. "I promised I would," James replied, surprised by how much the boy's enthusiasm affected him. "I always keep my promises." Olivia's raised eyebrow suggested she might dispute that claim, but she said nothing as they were seated at a corner table with a view of Fifth Avenue. Breakfast proved to be a masterclass in the chaos and joy of parenting young children. Jackson spilled orange juice twice. Emma insisted on cutting her own pancakes, resulting in a massacre of maple syrup and butter. Both twins talked simultaneously about their excitement for the museum, their words tumbling over each other in a symphony of childhood enthusiasm that left James both overwhelmed and enchanted. Through it all, Olivia maintained a calm presence, wiping spills, redirecting conversations, and ensuring both children ate something nutritious alongside their pancakes. She was a different mother than James had imagined during those dark nights after learning of her pregnancy. Not harried or struggling, but confident and capable, clearly the center of her children's universe. "Can James come to the museum with us?" Jackson asked as they finished eating, his hopeful expression including both adults in the question. "He knows about dinosaurs too." Olivia hesitated, looking to James with a question in her eyes. "That depends on whether James has other plans today." "Nothing that can't be rescheduled," he said immediately, already reaching for his phone to text his assistant. "I'd love to join you if that's all right." "Please, Mommy?" Emma added her voice to the campaign, surprising James with her support. "He can help us read the big words on the signs." Olivia's lips twitched with suppressed amusement. "I see I'm being outvoted." She met James's gaze directly. "You can join us for the museum, but we need to establish some ground rules first." After the children were distracted with the children's menu coloring pages, Olivia leaned forward, her voice low but firm. "They don't know who you are yet, James. I won't lie to them, but I won't confuse them with too much information all at once either. For today, you're my friend who's joining our outing. Nothing more." "I understand," James agreed, though the designation stung. Friend seemed both too much and too little for what they had been to each other. "And this isn't a commitment from me about the future," she continued. "I'm still processing all of this. I need time to think about what's best for them." "Of course." He hesitated, then added, "Thank you, Olivia, for even considering letting me into their lives. I know you have every reason not to." Something flickered in her eyes, recognition, perhaps, of the sincerity behind his words. "They deserve to know their father, James. I've always believed that. I just wasn't sure you were ready to be the father they deserve. And now I'm willing to find out." She glanced at the twins, who were comparing their dinosaur drawings with intense concentration. "But make no mistake, if you hurt them, if you make them feel for 1 second the way you made me feel, there won't be a third chance. No matter how many billions you have or how sorry you might be." The Museum of Natural History proved to be the perfect neutral ground for their tentative new dynamic. The twins' excitement created a buffer against awkward silences, their constant questions and observations keeping both adults engaged in the present rather than dwelling on the past. James found himself genuinely enjoying the experience, seeing the exhibits through the fresh perspective of childhood wonder. Jackson's encyclopedic knowledge of dinosaurs impressed him, while Emma's thoughtful questions about the dioramas revealed an analytical mind that reminded him startlingly of himself. "She's always been like that," Olivia commented when she caught him watching Emma carefully examine a model of early human tools. "Needs to understand how everything works. Takes things apart just to see what's inside. Like father, like daughter," James murmured, the realization both painful and precious. How many other traits had his children inherited from him? What other connections had he missed in their 4 years of life? As the day progressed, James observed Olivia with their children, noting the small rituals and routines that structured their family life. The way she always held their hands on escalators. How she carried extra snacks in her purse for when hunger threatened to derail their good moods. The patient repetition of walking feet, please, whenever excitement had them racing ahead. It was a dance he hadn't known existed, this daily choreography of parenting. A dance Olivia had mastered while he remained unaware that the music was even playing. If you've ever witnessed someone navigate a role with such natural grace that it makes you question your own capabilities, comment below. Sometimes the most humbling moments come when we realize how much we still have to learn, especially about the things that matter most. By late afternoon, the twins' energy was finally flagging. Emma leaned against Olivia's side as they exited the museum, while Jackson trudged beside them, his earlier enthusiasm dampened by fatigue. "I think that's our cue to head back to the hotel," Olivia said, checking her watch. "They need some downtime before dinner." "Of course," James agreed, trying to mask his disappointment that their day together was ending. "Thank you for letting me join you. It's been incredible." "Can James come back tomorrow?" Jackson asked, perking up slightly. "We're going to the big park with the boats." "Central Park," Olivia clarified. She hesitated, studying James's face. "That depends on whether James has work commitments." "Nothing that can't wait," James said immediately, then caught himself. "But only if you're comfortable with it, Olivia. I don't want to impose." She seemed to consider this, her gaze shifting between the twins and James. "Why don't you join us for dinner tonight instead? At the hotel. 7 o'clock. The children will be more rested, and afterward." She took a deep breath. "Afterward, we can talk. Really talk." "I'd like that," James said simply, his heart racing with unexpected hope. That evening, after a lively dinner where the twins regaled him with stories from their life in San Francisco, Olivia arranged for the hotel's childcare service to watch a movie with them in their suite, while she and James spoke privately in the hotel's rooftop bar. "They're amazing, Olivia," James said as they settled at a corner table overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline. "You've done an incredible job raising them." "They make it easy," she replied, a soft smile playing at her lips. "Most days, anyway. I've missed so much." The admission felt like a stone in his throat. First steps, first words, first everything. "Yes, you have." Olivia's directness hadn't changed. "The question is, where do we go from here?" James had spent hours preparing for this conversation, mentally rehearsing arguments and proposals. But sitting across from Olivia, watching the city lights reflect in her eyes, all his carefully crafted words abandoned him. "I want to be their father," he said simply. "Not just in name or through child support payments or occasional visits. I want to be present in their lives in all the ways that matter." "And how do you propose to do that when you live in Los Angeles and we're in San Francisco?" "I'll move," James said without hesitation. "Open a Bay Area office. Whatever it takes." Olivia's eyebrows rose. "You'd relocate your entire life? Just like that? For them?" "Yes." He leaned forward, his gaze steady. "I've spent 5 years building an empire that means nothing compared to what I saw today." "Nothing, Olivia." She studied him, searching for something in his expression. "And what about your trust issues, James? The paranoia that destroyed our marriage? Have those magically disappeared too?" "No," he admitted. "I still have scars. But I've had 5 years to reflect on what I lost because of them. 5 years of success that felt hollow because I had no one to share it with. No one I trusted enough to let in. And now I understand that protecting myself from pain meant missing out on joy." He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand but close enough to feel her warmth. "I can't promise I'll never have moments of doubt, but I can promise to recognize them for what they are, echoes of old wounds, not reflections of reality." Olivia was quiet for a long moment, her gaze drifting to the city beyond the window. "When I found out I was pregnant," she finally said, "my first instinct was to tell you. Despite everything, despite how badly you'd hurt me, I picked up the phone a dozen times." "Why didn't you?" "Because every time, I heard your voice in my head, accusing me of trying to trap you, of using pregnancy to secure your money." She looked back at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "And I couldn't bear to hear those words for real. Couldn't bear to have my children's existence treated as a manipulation rather than a miracle." The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. "I'm so sorry, Olivia. So deeply sorry for what I put you through." "I know you are," she said softly. "I can see that now. But James, being their father isn't just about taking them to museums or buying them toys. It's about showing up when it's hard. When they're sick or scared or angry. when they make mistakes or disappoint you. It's about loving them unconditionally, without the expectation of return. I want that chance, James said, his voice rough with emotion. The chance to be that kind of father. To learn from you how to love them the way they deserve. Olivia's expression softened. And what about us, James? Where do I fit in this new vision of yours? The question caught him off guard. He had been so focused on his children that he hadn't dared to hope for more. I don't expect anything from you, Olivia. I know I destroyed what we had. You didn't answer my question. James took a deep breath, gathering his courage. If I'm being completely honest, I never stopped loving you. Even when I was at my worst, even when I was driving you away with my suspicion and fear, underneath it all was love. Twisted and damaged, but real. And now I love you for who you've become in my absence. For the mother you are to our children. For the strength it took to build a life without me. He met her gaze directly. But I understand if that door is closed forever. I'll accept whatever boundaries you set, whatever relationship you're comfortable with. Olivia was quiet for so long that James began to fear he'd said too much. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the bar. I never stopped loving you either. That's what made it so painful. Hope bloomed in his chest, fragile but undeniable. Olivia, I'm not saying we can pick up where we left off, she cautioned. Too much has happened. We're different people now. I know, but maybe. She took a deep breath. Maybe we can start something new. Something built on who we are now, not who we were then. I'd like that, James said softly. More than I can express. It won't be easy, she warned. Trust once broken isn't easily rebuilt. Nothing worthwhile ever is. He smiled slightly. A wise woman once told me that when I decided I wanted to trust someone more than I wanted to protect myself, I'd be ready for love. I think I'm finally there, Olivia. She returned his smile, tentative but real. We'll take it slow. For the children's sake as much as our own. As slow as you need, James promised. I'm not going anywhere this time. 3 months later, James stood in the kitchen of his new San Francisco home, watching through the window as Emma and Jackson played in the backyard with their mother. The sight still filled him with wonder. This family he had nearly lost through his own fear and distrust. The transition hadn't been seamless. There had been difficult conversations with the twins about who he was and why he hadn't been in their lives. There had been moments of tension with Olivia as they navigated co-parenting and their slowly rekindling relationship. There had been nights when old doubts crept in, whispering that he didn't deserve this second chance. But each day brought new discoveries, new connections, new reasons to believe that the walls he had built around his heart were never as necessary as he had believed. Jackson had his laugh. Emma had his determination. Both had Olivia's compassion and resilience. And Olivia had shown him what true strength looked like. Not the ability to stand alone, but the courage to open yourself to love again after being hurt. To offer forgiveness not because it was deserved, but because holding on to anger only imprisoned yourself. As he watched, she looked up and caught his eye through the window. The smile she gave him, warm, genuine, still cautious but increasingly confident, filled him with the certainty no business success ever had. Daddy, come see, Jackson called, spotting him in the window. We found a caterpillar. Daddy. The word still sent a thrill through him every time he heard it. A title no amount of money could buy, no achievement could eclipse. As James stepped outside to join his family, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From a man who trusted no one to a father learning to see the world through his children's eyes. From a billionaire who had everything to a human being who finally understood what everything truly meant. Sometimes the most valuable things in life are the ones money can't buy. Sometimes our greatest mistakes lead to our most profound redemptions. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get a second chance to become the person we were always meant to be. If the story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to Timeless Love Tales with Mr. Harrison. I'd love to hear in the comments about a time when you received a second chance you weren't sure you deserved. or when you found the courage to trust again after being hurt. Remember, it's never too late to rebuild what fear has destroyed, whether it's a relationship, a dream, or your faith in yourself. Until next time, this is Mr. Harrison, reminding you that the greatest fortunes we can accumulate in this life aren't measured in dollars, but in the love we give and receive along the way.